Breathing words, where every word comes to life.
It ends with us. Colleen Hoover.
Chapter 5. An emotional chaos called Ryle. Hi everyone. It's good to have you here again with me. In our last meeting, we left Lily in that moment of pure adrenaline, right? She had just opened the shop, but she was also dealing with ankle pain because she sprained it after she fell from a chair while tidying up her flower shop, remember? But above all, she had that unexpected reunion with Ryle hammering in her head. Her life was taking kind of a massive leap, leaving marketing, betting everything on flowers, and trying to leave the past buried in Boston. Yeah, my friends, yet as we all know, fate loves to play tricks sometimes, right? And what happens now is, at the very least, wild. Pull up a chair, get comfortable, because what I'm going to tell you today about Chapter 5 is that perfect mix of I can't believe he did that with I completely understand you, Lily. But before we dive into this wonderful emotional chaos, leave your like on this video, because it really helps the channel grow and allows more people passionate about stories to find this little corner here. And of course, leave at least one emoji at the end of the video, so I know you were here and experienced this story with me. Now then, let's get into it, shall we? Well, in the previous chapter, we delved into one of the most emotional parts of Lily's story. We saw her memories with Atlas, the weight of childhood, the silence inside that house, and especially the way certain people enter our lives just when we need to breathe the most. And now, the story returns to the present. But Lily's present is also far from simple. Because after days trapped inside the apartment, trying to recover from her injured ankle, someone decides to show up at her door. This entire chapter feels like a mix of tension, desire, awkward humor, and a constant feeling that neither of them knows exactly what they're doing. It's kinda crazy, to be honest. Lily's ankle finally gave her a break. I mean, she waited a whole week, being prudent, because the last thing she needed was another fall, literal or emotional, right? The chapter shows that, little by little, Lily's life is returning to normal. Her ankle has finally gotten better. It still hurts a little, it still requires care, but she can walk again. And you can feel how much that relieves her. Because being stuck inside that apartment for a whole week clearly messed with her head a lot, especially after everything she remembered while reading the diaries. So of course, the first place she goes as soon as she manages to get out is the flower shop. This part even gives a good feeling of breathing after the emotional intensity of the previous chapter. Because when she enters the store, she gets a shock. The place is completely different. All that chaos that existed before, all the dust, trash, mess, old furniture, has begun to disappear. Alyssa and Marshall practically transformed the space while she was away. The windows were cleaned. The floor was washed. Things were organized. The office was already starting to take shape. And Lily stood there in the middle of the store, looking at everything in silence, with that strange feeling of seeing a dream starting to seem real. Because until then, everything still seemed kind of distant, right? It was just an idea, a risk, an impulsive madness. But now, the store is starting to look like a real place. Alyssa practically doesn't let Lily make any effort at all. She's constantly monitoring her because of her ankle. So a large part of the day ends up being dedicated to planning the store. And I love how these parts show Lily breathing for the first time in a long time. Because they're choosing colors, talking about the opening. They're planning all the details there. They create expectations. Now, Lily is finally feeling like she's building something of her own, you know? Although the money came from her father's inheritance, it wasn't exactly something that came from him. It's like it didn't come from the past, didn't come from pain. It came from her. And there's something very beautiful about that. Lily spent the day there, planning colors, dreaming about the grand opening. After all, in the book, she says there were only 54 days left. She felt alive again. But you know how it is. The body takes its toll. She arrived home exhausted, with that good kind of tiredness that comes from working for what you love. She just wanted the couch. But guess what? Someone is at her door. And someone's knocking at the door. Well, Lily was there in her apartment. She had just arrived home from work, and really, she wasn't expecting anyone. Her roommate was out. Her mother had already called. Who could it be? Poor Lily, after spending hours working, arrives home completely destroyed. She is tired, sweaty, with an aching body and a heavy head. And you can imagine that kind of good exhaustion, you know? When your body aches, but you feel like at least you did something important. So she just throws herself on the couch, just wanting to rest a little. But then, the atmosphere changes completely because someone's knocking on the door. She walks over, looks through the peephole, and at first, she doesn't recognize the person immediately. But then he raises his face, and that's it. Her heart goes like boom, and completely races. And mine too, by the way. She practically jumps and goes. Oh my god, it's Ryle. But it's not the impeccable Ryle he always is. This man's condition is almost worrying. He's a total mess. He has dark circles under his eyes, like a total panda face, you know? Apparently, he hasn't shaved at all. Like, he has messy hair, heavy breathing, and of course, he's wearing a wrinkled hospital uniform. He looks like he's been run over by a truck from exhaustion, like someone who hasn't slept in ages. But at the same time, the book makes a point of showing that he remains absurdly attractive. And here is the fatal detail. He's in his hospital scrubs. You know, it's funny because that hospital uniform just drives her crazy. Lily confesses to us that this is her absolute weak point. She practically hates the fact that she finds hospital uniforms so sexy. And honestly, I laughed so hard at that part. Because she's clearly trying to pretend she's maintaining her dignity, but her head is already completely out of whack. When she opens the door, he leans his head against the door frame, completely exhausted, and says a phrase that leaves anyone disarmed. She asks how he found her apartment, and he answers in the most absurd way possible. So he goes, "Do you know how many doors I knocked on before finding you? 29. That is so insane that even Lily herself is speechless right now. I mean, imagine the scene. This renowned neurosurgeon, without sleep for 2 days, walking from door to door in a huge building, knocking on doors like a possessed man, just because he couldn't remember her apartment number but desperately needed to see her? Like, why, right? Simply because he couldn't get Lily out of his head. This scene is so ridiculous that it ends up being funny, but at the same time, there's something very intense there. Because nobody does that without being completely obsessed for someone, I guess. The proposal. And then comes one of the most absurd, and at the same time funniest, scenes of this entire chapter. When Ryle enters the apartment, the energy between the two changes immediately. And I find it very interesting how the book builds this, because Ryle doesn't enter trying to charm her or trying to seem controlled. Quite the opposite. He seems like a completely emotionally disorganized man. He starts pacing back and forth in the living room, gesticulating, running his hand over his face, and talking fast, like someone who rehearsed a speech 1,000 times in his head, but realized too late that it made no sense at all. And look, I'm going to be very direct here, because as I was reading this, I found it all so insane, I didn't even know what to think. Ryle goes on to say that the next few months are the most crucial of his career as a neurosurgeon, that he's finishing his residency, and that he needs to be 100% focused on his final exams. But he admits that Lily is his ultimate distraction. He simply cannot stop thinking about her, at work, at home, at the hospital, everywhere. She got into his head in a way that he can't control. So, what is his genius solution? He comes to the conclusion that if they have sex just once, the obsession will pass and he'll finally get her out of his head so he can focus on work again. Can you believe that, guys? When we hear it summarized like that, it becomes completely ridiculous. Lily literally looks at him as if she's trying to figure out if this is a joke or a real nervous breakdown. And Lily, not getting it yet, and trying to understand, to figure out what's happening, asks him, "When was the last time you slept?" And turns out, the guy had just finished a brutal 48-hour shift. He was completely sleep-deprived and delirious, but the desire to be with her was stronger than his exhaustion. Lily tries to act rationally. She tries to resist, tells him to leave, and says she's sweaty and smells like dust from working at the store all day. But it seems like her body clearly isn't cooperating because the book makes it so clear how intensely attracted she is to him. The proximity of their bodies, the heavy breathing, the tension is pure fire. But then, the situation gets to such a desperate level that it's impossible not to laugh. This man literally gets down on his knees on the floor. A renowned neurosurgeon on his knees, begging with total puppy dog eyes. Is it ridiculous? Yes. But is it charming? For her, I think so. Lily completely loses the ability to take it seriously, and she ends up giving in. But in her own way. She says, "I'm going to take a shower. Wait for me in the bedroom." Can you believe that? Well, and then Ryle agrees immediately with almost desperate speed, terrified she might change her mind. And honestly, he was probably right. But then, you know what's even crazier about all this? She actually accepts it. Me here like, huh? You know? I don't know about you guys. For me, I just thought it was crazy. But anyway. So Lily goes to take a shower, and she takes almost an hour. She shaves, washes her hair, and prepares herself mentally, thinking this is going to be like that night. She gathers her courage, opens the bathroom door all clean and perfumed, expecting to find this seductive man waiting in her bed. And what do you think she finds there, huh? Ryle is practically passed out. And it's not a light nap. It's that deep, heavy sleep, complete with loud snoring. The poor guy was so exhausted that the second his body touched Lily's soft bed, his brain simply shut down. Lily's reaction is absolutely priceless. She's indignant for a second. After all, she spent a whole hour getting ready, but then she feels this wave of tenderness seeing how relaxed he looks. So, she does what anyone in a good mood would do these days. She grabs his cell phone, lies down right next to him, shows off her cleavage, and takes a really good picture. Total proof of what he missed out on by sleeping. Well, with nothing else to do, she just turns off the light and falls asleep right next to him, without them even having kissed. Okay, and that's me here again, like, huh? Right? Because after all that tension, all that absurd insistence from Ryle, and all that chaotic energy between the two, when Lily finally came out of the bathroom, ready to meet him, the man was simply asleep. Passed out. But it wasn't a light nap, no. Ryle was completely destroyed by exhaustion, in a deep sleep. Until then, it seemed like everything was heading towards an extremely intense, impulsive, and perhaps even emotionally dangerous moment for them. But the book breaks all that tension in a very human way. Suddenly, Lily realizes that behind that frantic, emotionally messed up man, there is just someone completely exhausted. A guy who had just gotten off a brutal 48-hour shift and who clearly reached his physical limit. And that changes the way she looks at him at that moment. She stops being annoyed and simply starts watching him sleep. The morning after. There's a very strange intimacy in that scene, because they haven't even properly kissed yet, they haven't really slept together, they haven't started anything, but even so, they're there, sharing the bed in silence. And honestly, I found this scene much more intimate than it would have been if they had actually had sex that night, because there's pure vulnerability there, especially on his part. And then, the next morning, the mood changes. Sunlight streams in through the window, and Lily wakes up feeling Ryle's fingers slowly tracing her arm. The way this part is described is so delicate, and she really likes it, especially because, for the first time since he appeared at her door, he's not frantic, he's not begging, and he's not acting out of control. We see that now he's calm, almost affectionate. He even notices a little heart tattoo she has near her neck. He slowly runs his fingers over her skin and kisses that area in a very careful, tender way. You can feel a different kind of sweetness in that scene. It's like during his sleep, all that emotional chaos of his disappeared for a moment. But then comes the goodbye, you know? And I don't know, honestly, that part gave me a really strange feeling. Ryle suddenly wakes up in doctor mode. He's late, he needs to leave. He apologizes several times for sleeping in, says he feels like the most despicable man in the world, but then he reaffirms that promise that hurts us to hear. I'll never speak to you again. I promise. That's because right after making that crazy proposal the night before, he said it would only be that one time, and they would never speak again afterward. So, he decides to leave. He puts on his shoes, looks at her one last time in silence, and walks out the door. Lily tries to act normally, but you can clearly see how much it affects her too. And I'll be honest with you guys, I understand her side of wanting to feel desired and wanted, but I thought he was so cold to her. Like, where did all that intense excitement from the night before go? You know what I mean? The day turned, he woke up, and now he seems like a completely different person. At that moment, Lily understands something important. Maybe the problem was never a lack of attraction between them. The problem is that they want entirely different lives. And that weighs heavily on her. She stays there, feeling her face heat up, forcing herself not to be sad. She repeats to herself like a mantra, I'm a brave and bold businesswoman with zero fucks to give for men in scrubs. She even tries to convince herself that it was better this way, that she removed the band-aid once and for all. But we can feel, between the lines, that the silence remaining in the apartment after the door slammed weighed way too heavily. And that's how Chapter 5 ends, guys. With a date that promised pure fire and ended in, basically, a deep sleep. And a goodbye that seemed definitive. At least that's what it seems like. Thoughts. This chapter seems light at times, funny at others, but it also leaves a very strange feeling at the end, doesn't it? Because Ryle is too intense, almost chaotic, impulsive, and at the same time, there are moments when he seems extremely passionate, so sincere. That's what makes us feel conflicted the whole time. And I think Lily is too, you know? Because she clearly feels something very strong when she's near him, but at the same time, she seems to realize that intensity and stability don't always go hand in hand. And I'll be very honest with you here, because this part left me with a very strange feeling. Lily tried to resist him several times throughout the entire chapter. She tried to act rationally, tried to set limits, tried not to be carried away by his intensity, but in the end, she gave in. But even after she finally said yes, even after all that absurd insistence on his part to get what he wanted, the moment she actually accepts, he simply falls asleep and then leaves as if it could all be over right there. And I thought that was really crazy, truly. I know he was really tired and all that, and most likely, going after someone like that wasn't something he usually did, right? Because he had even said it before. In fact, he said it so clearly the first time he saw her, that with him, it was only casual encounters. He said he didn't want to get involved with anyone because he had other priorities in life. And I don't think he's all wrong, you know? At least he was sincere from the very first moment. But it gives you the feeling that Ryle is an extremely intense person when he wants something, almost impulsive even, but at the same time, there's a very large emotional distance between them. It's as if he desperately wanted the feeling, the moment, her presence, but without really allowing it to take deeper root in his life. I think the book makes that very explicit in that scene. Not necessarily in a right or wrong way, but showing very clearly the kind of person he is at that moment in his life. Well, we can already see from that the kind of person she's going to have to deal with, right? But now I want to know what you think. What did you think of Ryle's attitude? Is knocking on 29 doors romantic, or is it a warning sign? And his proposal of one time to forget, do you think that actually works, or does it just make things worse? And Lily, will she really be able to focus only on the store and forget this neurosurgeon who seems like a hurricane in her life? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your theories. Share with me if you've ever been through something similar to what happened to Lily, like getting all dressed up for a date that completely falls through and goes nowhere. Or even if anyone ever randomly knocked on your door out of the blue, asking for sex just because they couldn't stop thinking about you. You know what I mean? It's wild, but it can happen. I mean, it literally just happened to Lily. It Ends With Us, a best-selling book by Colleen Hoover, so loved that it already has its own movie.
The story continues.
I'll be back soon. Make sure to like this video and leave me a comment, because I want to know your thoughts too. Share this video with someone you know who loves a good story. Make sure to subscribe too, because the next chapters are getting way more intense and more impossible to stop listening to. I'm sure you don't want to miss anything. Thank you so much for being here. Breathing Words, where every word comes to life. Your place to hear stories with voice and heart.